Hi everybody! In this video, we will see how did I build the PowerApps application using SQL as the data source. We will explore things like the functions and operators I used, and we will see the benefits as well as limitations we could have with SQL Azure. So let's start with this video. Okay, so let's start reviewing how did I implement this PowerApps application. So here we are in the home screen, but first of all, let's understand the SQL database, right? Remember that I have created a SQL database with different tables and relationship within those tables. So you will see that we have the course table, course category, language, level, modality, and professor. If we look at the relationship between those tables, let's see actually this diagram that shows us the relationship that exists between those tables. So you will see that the main table is course, and then there is a relationship with the rest of the tables. I can share you this table later. Just let me know in the comments if you want to have the script to recreate that table as well. But it's also important to understand that we will also need two views to show the values in the data table in PowerApps. So for example, I have created this course view and course view version 2. Let's explore, for example, course view. Let's copy basically this query so we will be able to understand better the content and the structure of this query. So if I execute this query, what we will see is this table with the information that we need to show in our data table in PowerApps, right? Basically, instead of showing the language ID, I have the language name or the course category or the course modality or professor instead of the IDs, right? What we need is basically to show these values in PowerApps in our table. So this is the main view that we will use. There is a second view, and we'll explore that view later because it's part of one of the examples that we are gonna look. But let's start now looking at how did I connected my PowerApps application with this table. Okay, so if we come back to our PowerApps Canvas app, and if we go to the data section, you will see that I have connected my Canvas app to all of these tables, right? Including the two views. So we have course view and course view version 2, as well as category, language, level, modality, and professor. To do that, we just need to search for SQL Server. And well, in this case, I already have the connection, but you can add your own connection. You can click on add connection. You can select, for example, the authentication type. If it's a SQL Azure database, you will be able to use Azure AD integrated. But if it's a SQL Server database, you will need to use Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication. And in this case, you will need to use a data gateway. I'm using this particular data gateway that I have created. Remember that this database is in my PC, it could be in a server, and I have installed a gateway to connect to that database. But again, you can create your own SQL Azure database with the same structure. It's the same. It's going to work as equal as if it's a SQL Server on-prem database. Now, the second thing to do is I have these combo boxes, right? As you can see here, I have the category combo box, language, level, professor, etc. And what we will do is basically we will select the combo box, and in the items property, I'm going to specify the name of the specific table. So in this case, is the course category table. If we press Alt, we will see the values basically that are automatically populated. So it's very easy. Basically, you specify the name of the table in the items property of each combo box, right? You will see all of the tables here. The second property I change, in addition to obviously the border, the colors, etc., is the select multiple property, right? The select multiple is false, so I will be able to select just one item at the same time. This is because we are going to filter the values by one item selected from each of the combo boxes. Then I added these two toggle controls, right? If you want to add a toggle control, you just go to Insert, input, and you see the toggle control here, right? And I change one of its properties, which is false text. When the selection is false, the value is going to be no, and when the selection is true, the true text is going to be yes. And the same is going to be for include certificate. Why? Because if we go back to our table, basically, and if we look at the is open or certificate, basically we are going to evaluate a Boolean value. So we will review how did I do that filter later. Okay, finally I have a text box for course name. So basically we will put the course name text here, and we will apply that filter as well. Now, let's look at the filter. And it's important also always to review the documentation. So if we go to the documentation, remember again, we are using SQL Server as the data source, and filter is a delegable function. So all the queries are going to happen in the backend. And we can filter by number, data type, text, Boolean, or even date time, but with a specific workarounds. And that's another example I'm going to show you in a minute. So if we go to the filter function, it's always important to review all the delegation information, the syntaxes, etc. But if we look at the example, right, basically you need to specify the data source, and then you need to specify the logical test, right? The logical evaluation, right? And based on that, it's going to filter the value. So there are various examples here that you can use or you can test in your own environment. So let's go back to the application and let's review the filter that we have applied, right? We have applied multiple filters. You can see here we have applied 8 filters. That's why we can apply, or we can filter by multiple validations at the same time. So the first value in the filter function is basically the data source. In this case, remember that I'm using my view as the data source. So instead of just querying the specific course table, I am basically querying my view. That is why when we look at this table, we basically see the values instead of the IDs of the other tables, right? The related tables. For example, in the case of language, if we go to here, we will see that this item is showing me the language that comes from in the view, right? The same for course category. It's basically showing me the values that comes from the view. And again, you can insert a table in the following way. You can go here and insert data table, and then after selecting the table, right? And this is important to do before applying any filter, right? You just need to create a table and add the fields that you want to show in this table. So the way to do that is selecting the table. In the data source, you specify the value course view, and in edit fields, you can click on add fields and you will see all the fields, and you can add those fields here, and you can change the order if you want, for example, right? That's the way to add this table. So let's go back to the filter. So again, the data source is course view. The first filter is by category. So let's focus on this expression first. So basically what we are doing here is we are filtering based on the value selected from the CBX category combo box, right? So for example, if I selected the software development category, we will filter all the records in the SQL table where the course category is software development, right? We will review this expression later. I'm going to explain you why we are using this particular expression, but also check that we are using AND, right? With AND, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be able to apply multiple filters at the same time. So it's gonna filter by course category, but as well it's gonna filter by language, for example, or course level. So in this particular case, if we wanna filter by language, we can see that the expression is very similar. So we will evaluate the language based on the value selected from the CBX language combo box, or the same for level, or the same for modality. You will see that the expression, the validation is very similar and very easy to replicate for the rest of the fields that we want to use. If we want to add additional fields, additional columns to our table, perfect. You can do that, and you can use a very similar expression, always adding AND. in the expression. So next, let's evaluate the following expression, why we are applying the following, right? And the reason is the following. If we are not selecting any value, as you can see here, we want to show all the values in the table, right? For example, if we are not selecting any category or any modality, instead of just showing blank values, a table without values, we want to show all the tables. It's like we don't want to apply any filter. And that's why we apply this expression, right? Because what we are evaluating here is the following. Is the value of the combo box CVX category is blank? Don't apply any filter and just show me the values of the course view. So we will use the same expression here. Because if we don't use that expression, what is going to happen, or if we don't use that validation, basically what is going to happen is that it's not going to show me any value. The other filters are based on the toggle control, right? For example, if toggle is open, right, is it true or is yes, right? It will show me all the fields, all the records that has the is open value to true. And the same for certificate, right? It's evaluating the value of is open and certificate if the course includes a certificate based on the value from this specific control. And finally, the last filter or the last expression here is the based on the course name. Now remember that the way it works is, for example, if I specify 365, what it's gonna do is gonna filter based on the course name field, and if the course name contains the text specified in this text box, it will filter, it will apply the filter, right? For example, let's say I write power, it will show me the value here. Or if I write training, it will show me all the courses that contains the word training in its course name. So if we go again to the application, the filter or the expression that we have applied or that we are using is the following. We are using in. If txt course name, the value of the text of this text box is in name. So basically, if name contains the values specified in this control, it's gonna apply the field. And similar as we did with the combo boxes, we are going to use this expression. If it's blank, basically show me all the values, don't apply any filter. Yeah, this is basically because by default the value of this text box is in blank. Perfect. So that's the way we apply that filter. Also, let's evaluate the expression on this control. This is a HTML control. You can insert that type of control from here. If you go to text, you can select HTML text. And basically what we did is we use the following functions, right? We use max, min, average, and sum. So max basically asks me to put the value of a particular field from the data source, which is course view, and basically evaluate which is the max value from unit price. The same is going to happen with min and with average. Sum is going to be very similar as well, but in this particular example, I am evaluating the seats instead of the unit price field. So those are expressions that as well are delegable to SQL. So they are going to work without any problem, and the performance is going to be optimal for this particular example. Now let's look at other screens. Let's go to numeric filters, for example. What we have here is a drop down in this case, and if we go to the items, you will see that I have specified the following items. If the value is less than or equal, is greater than or equal to, is or is not. And basically we are going to evaluate the value that we specified in the following text box. Now, another important thing, the thing that I did is if we select this drop down and if we go to the unchanged property, I have applied the following validation using the switch function. So basically, depending on the value selected from that particular drop-down, I will specify the value. I'm going to create basically a contextual variable, and I'm going to specify a numeric value to that variable, right? So instead of basically evaluating the text value, the text that the whole text in the drop-down, I just want to evaluate the value of the variable. That's why I use this numeric variable. It's easier to apply validations or filters based on numbers. So now that we know how did we apply that, basically based on the particular selection from the drop down, we are going to apply this if condition. So if, for example, I selected the first option, basically what I'm doing is I'm going to apply the following filter. So I am evaluating the value of the number of hours, right? So remember that the first option, we can look at this. The first option was is less than or equal. The second is greater than or equal to, right? So if we look at this filter, basically it is if it's less than or equal, if the value from the text box is less than or equal to the total number of hours, so apply that filter, right? Or filter all the number of hours that are greater than or equal to the value on the text box. If the option is the number 3, let's apply this filter, right? It's the value is equal, and it's if the option 4, let's apply when the total number of hours is different than the value specified in the text box. This expression, as you can see here, is very similar to what we did in the home screen based on the combo box, right? If we don't specify values in the text box, just show me the table without applying any particular filter, right? That's why we are using these expressions basically. And as you can see here, all the functions and expressions and operators are delegable to SQL Azure, so we don't see any delegable warning. The performance is going to be optimal for this particular example. So that's great. If we can, remember, we can basically validate that as we did before. We can, for example, apply the following filter. Okay, so we can test this filter as well. For example, remember that we can filter by is less than or equal to 20, for example, right? And it's going to work. Perfect. Okay, now let's explore another example. It could be the text filters. So this case is going to be very similar to what we did in the previous case, right? We have a drop down, we have different expressions, for example, is, contain, does not contain, start with, ends with, basically different options, right? If we go to the onChange property, we will see that we have applied a very similar condition here as we did in the numeric filters screen, right? So based on the value that I select from the drop down, I will apply a value, or I'm going to set a value to our contextual variable that in this case is going to be course filter, right? And based on that, if I go to my table, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply all the filters. So the expressions are going to be very similar, very simple. If the value is selected from the dropdown is, and just using the following expression, right? Name is equal to the value selected from specified in the text box. If it contains, we are going to use the in expression, right? Similar to what we did in the home screen to filtering by course name. Is does not contain basically is the opposite from the previous filter, right? So basically we use the same expression, but we add the following expression, right? We add not. In the case of starts with, we can use the following function. Starts with, we specify the column from the table, and we specify the value that we are evaluating, which is basically the value from the text box. In the case of ends with, is very similar. We use the ends with function. We put the value of the column, and we evaluate the value from the text box. And the last one, which is empty, basically. No, actually we have one more. Let me see. In the case of is empty, basically we evaluate if the name value is blank, right? And in the last one, if it's not empty, I'm gonna basically, in the case if it's not empty, it's basically the opposite from the previous evaluation, right? Perfect. So that's the way this is gonna work. Very easy. Let's come back again. All of those functions are delegable. If you can remember which functions or operators or expressions are not delegable, you can just go to the documentation and you can see which expressions we have used, right? So we have used most of the following functions and operators, as you can see here. Now let's go to the search function, right? The search function is another one which is very easy to implement. Basically, this is a text box. We go to the table and here we use the search function where we need to specify the source, which in this particular case is the course view. And then we need to specify the text that we are evaluating. In this case is the value from the text box. And then we can specify the different columns from the table in which we want to search. This is great, right? This is a great functionality because that means that we can search values in multiple fields at the same time. So remember that how does that functionality works? Basically, if I search even by category in that particular case, right? For example, if I search by software, we can filter by course category as well. Or if we search by C#, for example, we will get the values that we need. So this is a great function and a great functionality available in SQL as well. Now let's go again to the other examples. Now let's go to operator. So remember that in this particular case, we are gonna use some specific operators that are delegable in SQL Azure or SQL Server. Remember that these expressions can be only used on number data types, right? On fields that have the number data type. So if we go back, basically remember that what we are doing is we are evaluating the potential deal size, and we get that potential deal size multiplying the unit price with the number of seats. So if we go to this table, you will see that the expression is the following. I'm multiplying unit price per seats and evaluating if the value is less than or equal to the text value, or the same if it's greater than or equal to the value. And I'm using the value function because, as you can see, the value from this text box is a text, right? So when we use value, basically we are formatting this value to be a number, so we can evaluate two numbers here. So those two options are also delegable to SQL Azure or SQL Server, which is great as well. As we see in a previous video, this type of expressions are not delegable for the rest of the data sources, right? So that's a benefit that only SQL Server have. Now, let's look at the final example, which is date. And here is where we had to do a workaround, because if we'll go again to the documentation, by default, we can filter by a data type field. So remember how this filter works. If we go to this screen and we want to filter by a start date range, right? So let's say it starts here, for example, right? It will show me the values here, and then it's going to evaluate the start date. So if the start date is started between this range, it's gonna show me the courses. So what we did here is very interesting. What we did is we follow the recommendations in the documentation, right? The documentation tell me that we can filter by datetime or data type, right? But we cannot. We can create a calculated column using this expression, and that calculated column can be a number column. So in that way we can filter by numbers. So what I did is basically I created a view, which is the course view number 2 or version 2. If I look at the query, basically let me copy this, paste this here, and you will see that what I did is basically in this query I added the following column, which is the column start date num and end date num, basically, and the expression is the following, right? Is the same formula or that was suggested in the documentation. So I'm evaluating the start date, which is a data type field, right? So if I execute the following query, what I'm gonna get is basically these two fields, which are a number, and we can evaluate with this number. So basically I connected that view to my PowerApps Canvas app, which is here. And I selected that view as my data source for this particular table. Just let me select a value here so we can see some values in the table. Okay. And the other thing that I did is basically, if we go to the filter, you will see the following. I validated the start date 9 field, which comes from the view, and I evaluated if it's greater than or equal to the following expression, which is basically evaluating the value. I use the same formula I used in my SQL database. It's the same formula I'm using here also to get the value from the selected date, right? From the date picker. So based on that, basically, I apply the following evaluation. So it's more than or equal to the value selected from the first date picker, or is less than or equal to the second date picker, we will apply the filter, right? So that's the way it's gonna work. So it's an easy way to implement that using that workaround. Obviously, you need to do this additional work of creating those numeric columns, but it's something that is possible, is supported, and this expression is legible, right? The performance is gonna be great here as well. So with that, I think we have explored all the functions or the operators and expressions that we can use to apply filters to our SQL database without delegation warnings, with a great performance. Now, it's important also to understand and go to this documentation, right? Because you will see that there are some specific functions that are not delegable, or some specific expressions that can be used between delegable functions. For example, filter, as you can see in the documentation, right? Filter is a delegable function in SQL. But if in between that expression we use a non-delegable function, we will have delegation warnings, right? For example, let's say that between the filter function we use if, or we use concatenate, or add in, or lower, upper, and others, right? We will have the delegation warnings. In addition to that, there are other expressions that are non-delegable. And it's important for you to understand that, because usually we use a lot collect or clear collect. But collect or clear collect are functions that are not delegable. We can delegate those functions to any data source. So you should avoid using them. As you can see in this example, instead of using collections, I am directly specifying the value in the item, right? So to avoid using collections, what you can do is, for example, using SQL views. You can create multiple SQL views, and then based on that, you can basically get the values instead of using collections, because the collections basically execute queries or processing of data in the front end. In addition to that, you can use other alternatives, right? For example, because look at this, right? Choices, first or last, are also non-delegable functions, right? So please review this documentation. I'm gonna put that documentation, this link in the description of the following video, but it's important for you to review that. And finally, there's gonna be some workarounds. So you will see some specific functionality that you will want to implement using SQL, and probably to do that you will have some challenges using non-delegable functions. So instead of doing that, you, for example, can also use store procedures. Now, store procedures are only supported on Power Automate currently, right? So if you want to connect to a store procedure and provide values to the parameters of that store procedure to get information, you can use only Power Automate. Currently, it's not supported on PowerApps, but remember that you can execute a Power Automate flow from PowerApps, from a button in PowerApps. So you can go here, you can select your button, and you can go to action and basically specify the Power Automate flow that is gonna execute that expression. So there are workarounds, there are alternatives. try to avoid using non-delegable functions. Okay, that was all for today's video. If you like this content, please don't forget to subscribe and put your comments below. In our next video, we will explore how did I build the PowerApps application but using this time Dataverse as the data source. So see you in the next video. Bye.